I want to introduce a wonderful man who really needs no introduction. Tim Wilson has been a friend to Carol and me forever. In fact, we have a fun fact to share about Tim from when he was a little 2-year-old boy. He and his two older brothers and his parents were at the rustic family cabin on Grand Mesa near Grand Junction. Tim and his brothers had each been given one of those cute little, very colorful caps with the twirly tops on the top. Well, apparently Tim didn't like his because he pitched it into one of the holes in the outhouse. And this story came directly from his father. So here's a photo of Tim at a little older stage. Can you all see this? Is that showing up? Okay. He was quite good looking, wasn't he? And our Tim of today has aged beautifully, as have all of us. Tim has led a very personally challenging life, and you will be absolutely amazed at what he has done with his life. So here's Tim.
I've been given just 40 minutes to talk about my life as an activist for LGBTQ equality. 1 minute for each of the 40 years, 1980 to 2020, while also incorporating and showing the importance of choral music. So here goes. My mother, father, and two older brothers were all born in Colorado, but I was born December 1948 and raised in Charleston, West Virginia, where my father's first job took him after graduation from CU Boulder. Our family's social life centered around the Baptist Temple, which had 4 or 5 different choirs. So I grew up listening to and enjoying choral music. It was expected that my brothers and I would sing in the choirs appropriate for our ages, but I never considered myself a singer. However, all these years later, I still maintain a friendship with the man who was minister of music and choir director during my high school years. Our senior minister at that time was very progressive in many ways. Notably, he arranged for our Baptist Youth Fellowship to have joint activities with the corresponding youth group from the city's Black Baptist Church. West Virginia, which became a northern state during the Civil War, was one of the very first states to voluntarily desegregate its schools. Hard to believe today, of course, since West Virginia had the highest percentage vote in favor of Trump in 2016. Fortunately, all my close friends from those formative years are politically progressive like me, so I'm thankful for that and for my special childhood there. At that time of the 1950s and 60s, Charleston was dubbed the chemical capital of the world. All the major chemical companies were there, including Monsanto, Dow, and Union Carbide, where my dad worked as an engineer. So for a while, Charleston had a higher than average median income and quality of life. I think some of our sage singers might appreciate this little tidbit. I never went to Boy Scout summer camp, but rather to Union Carbide's Camp Camelot, where the summer before my first year of junior high school, 1961, I received the Camelot Nature Award. LOL, right? In Charleston, I attended a brand new trend-setting high school, which featured 40, 60, 80, and 120-minute class modules, for which computerized scheduling was done by Ohio State University, and Russian was one of the foreign languages offered. I immediately got involved with the school newspaper, where I found a home for my writing and editing skills. My grandmother was an English teacher, and this did seem to come naturally for me. As a senior, I became editor-in-chief of our Every Other Week newspaper, which won top national journalism awards for its category both semesters that school year. Literally the day after my high school graduation ceremony, our family moved to Montreal, Quebec. This was a top 5 life-changing event for me. Both of my brothers were already in college, so this had the most emotional impact on me as the youngest. I was deeply saddened about having to leave home. Soon, however, this hillbilly from West Virginia not only experienced the culture shock of moving to a big city, but also quickly fell in love with all that Montreal had to offer. Montreal was hosting the World's Fair that summer, Expo 67, and I became primary tour guide for the city, its subway system, and the World's Fair for all our friends who came to visit, planting the seed to be a tour guide later in life. In the autumn of 1967, I joined my middle brother Keene at Ohio State University in Columbus. He and I were both housed in a fourplex of high-rise dorms, which also happened to be home for the school's football and baseball players. Oh my, I was starting to realize that I was gay, before Stonewall, mind you, but I was petrified to have to share the shower facilities with those guys. I dealt with a tremendous amount of fear, guilt, and shame as I struggled to come to terms with my reality. Organized religion really does a number on us queer folks, doesn't it? This coming out process was painful and prolonged, and I could not focus on my studies. After 3 years, I dropped out of college and never finished. I started a 3-city and 17-year career in bank operations, which proved to be the only stable aspect of my life for a very long time. While in Columbus, I went to my first gay bar called Frankie's, where I met my first longtime partner, Dwayne. We moved to Denver together in July of 1972. Earlier, while on vacation, I had interviewed for a job at Colorado National Bank downtown, and I was hired to take the place of a woman named Jan, who would be leaving her position to have a baby. I worked there for 6 months and then trained with Jan for another month before she left on maternity leave. And by then we had become good friends. Turns out that Jan and I share the same birthday, and something else in common too. Surprise, a few years later, Jan came out as lesbian. And in the mid-1980s, she went back to school to become a nurse specializing in HIV care. And she found work at USC Medical Center's new dedicated HIV outpatient clinic. Jan is my longest time LGBTQ friend, now living in Montana. I have often referred to her as my gay twin. Now it's time for some of the instability, as if there wasn't enough of that already with the emotional turmoil of coming out. After we moved to Denver, Dwayne proved to be both an alcoholic and an abusive lover. I moved out and then back in, but the second time I moved out, even though financially it was very scary, I was strong enough to end the relationship for good after 5 years of ups and downs. In later years, when I was more mature and had some positive experiences under my belt, I got involved as a member of the Community Advisory Committee for the Colorado Anti-Violence Project. My second long-term partner was James, an African-American and the oldest of 8 children. There were some ups and downs with his family, not only for his being gay, but also for having a white boyfriend. We lived together for about 5 years, and sometimes I would observe racial discrimination when we went out in public, such as not being seated for a very long time at a no reservations restaurant, while others behind us were quickly shown a table. We also heard derogatory comments behind our backs when we went out to the gay bars. These experiences had a profound effect on me, as I had never really observed racism before, even though mild compared to the experiences of so many others. When this relationship ended, it was not because of any violence, but like the previous time, I had almost no one in my life with whom to share my pain and grief, certainly no one at work or in my family. In 1979, though, I finally came out to my mother. Turns out that she had known since I was in elementary school, many years before I even had a clue about my differentness. Her first question to me was, "Are you happy?" Fortunately, at that point in my life, I was able to say yes. The following year, I learned about Parents of Gays and eventually attended my first meeting of what we now know as PFLAG. That's where I met future National President Eleanor Llewellyn, whose daughter Janet has been very involved with Gala choruses, and many of you know her, and Nancy Keene, local chapter founding president, who served in that role for 12 years, who many of you also knew. Eleanor and Nancy each had both a lesbian daughter and a gay son. Doubly blessed, we came to say. PFLAG in 1980 is also where I met Carol White, founder of 4 LGBTQ+ choruses and head of our Sage Singers membership team, who has been an inspiration to so many of us for a very long time. Yay. In 1980 was the year that I saw an ad in Outfront or The Advocate for a new organization in San Francisco called Black and White Men Together. After my experiences with James, it certainly caught my eye, and I called the number in the ad and asked for more information to be sent to me in the mail. I made the decision to fly to San Francisco and check out this group firsthand. My mother was coming to Denver for another visit in the fall, so I made my reservation for Halloween, Friday, October 31st, 1980, leaving for San Francisco a couple hours after my mother's flight home to Houston. And so it is that I consider Halloween 1980 as the anniversary date of my life as an accidental activist. Because when I got back to Denver, I started right away to schedule a date and time to have a meeting for Black and White Men Together at the Gay Community Center in January the next year, and to start promoting it. That first meeting was a big success, and that's how I came to be the founder of the Denver chapter of BWMT, as well as a long-term activist for LGBTQ equality. I never really thought about or considered becoming an activist. At the time, I wasn't even cognizant of the term. It just sort of happened. I think I was helped along by a strong organizing gene on the Wilson side of my family, and from my mother too. Through this work and getting involved though, I soon discovered my innate passion for equality and justice and doing what's right. I guess you could say that I had found my calling. My coach, mentor, mastermind partner, and friend, Reverend Jody Stevenson, says that my activist work is actually my soul purpose work. So maybe it wasn't an accident after all. I was also blessed at that first organizational meeting to be introduced to Chip, whom I started to date a few months down the road and with whom I had an 8-year relationship. Chocolate Chip, as he often called himself, and I attended the first national convention of BWMT in San Francisco in June of 1981. It was a life-changing experience for both of us. For Chip, because he was still in the process of coming out, and for me, because there were opportunities to get more involved since I saw a need for such an organization. At that gathering, I was one of the 4 authors of our statement of purpose. I was chosen to be on the interim steering committee to conduct our first national election of officers later that year. Back in Denver, recognizing both the power of parents in our movement for LGBTQ equality and the need to have organizations working together for the common good, I helped BWMT organize a fundraising event for PFLAG. It was the first of many for me. Choral music finally returned to my life in 1982, when in June, Nancy Keene and I attended the inaugural concert of the Denver Gay Men's Chorus at the Aladdin Theater. Colfax and Race, just a few blocks from where I have now lived for 26 years. Nancy and I were both instantly hooked for life on the LGBT choral movement, as it began both to enrich our lives and to inspire us to get through the many challenges of activism that lay ahead. In the early years, members of PFLAG were the ushers for all the concerts of DGMC, DWC, and Harmony, and Nancy had a front row seat for every performance of every concert series of every chorus. In chorus concerts, became the focal point of my own social calendar too. In 1983, HIV and AIDS had begun its assault on our gay male community. Carol Lease, whose choice as executive director of the center was opposed by some gay white men of privilege, approached me about organizing a community fundraiser so they could print educational brochures with information on what we knew about HIV transmission at this point in the so-called previous, but actually continuing pandemic. Working with owner Bob Engel, I lined up the participation of the Imperial Court, BWMT, PFLAG, and other organizations for an event at BJ's Carousel, a truly community-wide effort, which raised $800 for the brochures. It doesn't sound like much in today's dollars, but back then the event was considered a big success. The Colorado AIDS Project was being formed at this time too, and I served on the original CAP Community Advisory Board. I knew founding executive director Julian Rush from PFLAG, and we were even roommates for a month at one point. But that is another story for another time. Another reason 1983 proved to be fortuitous is because that's when I met Judith Nelson at a PFLAG meeting. But of course, it was even more so for her because that's when and where she met Carol White. The rest is both LGBT choral and PFLAG history. Do you know that when they met, Carol was a gay woman and Judith was a lesbian? And do you know that Judith is the person most responsible for adding the L to the PFLAG Denver acronym? One of my longest time Denver friends from 1972, Mac and his partner Ron, were founding members of BWMT. Ron was also a founding member of DGMC. So when we learned that the men's chorus was going to be performing at Lincoln Center in New York in 1983, Mac and Ron and Chip and I decided to go to New York for COAST, which stood for Come Out and Sing Together. It would later become recognized as Gaelic Chorus's Festival One. You could say that I was energized by the festival for at least the next year. That was a good thing too, because 1984 was even more pivotal in my life than the previous year. I was chosen to be national co-chair of BWMT early in the year, about the same time that I joined the board of PFLAG Denver, which was going to be hosting the third national PFLAG convention in the fall. That year, I averaged at least 40 hours a week in my volunteer roles, while also working full-time at the bank. Let's just say I had more energy then than I do now. I was chair of the publicity committee for the PFLAG convention, which had 15 members and 3 smaller working groups. The best committee I ever chaired, and very successful too, with multiple newspaper articles and pictures and radio interviews of plenary speakers and workshop leaders. For example, a Jewish mom and Holocaust survivor with her lesbian daughter. Very powerful stuff. Judith and I served on the program committee with Eleanor Llewellyn as chair. I think my biggest contribution there was to suggest that we should invite newly elected Mayor Federico Pena to be the keynote speaker rather than just give a perfunctory welcome message. And boy, did he deliver. He lambasted the so-called moral majority, labeling them neither moral nor the majority. And that was definitely front page coverage for PFLAG in both daily newspapers. And of course, the closing banquet of the convention featured Carol's specially formed 100-voice PFLAG Festival Chorus, with 70 men from DGMC singing together with 70 women. Their performance was so inspiring that it brought everyone to tears and was the highlight of the entire convention. Music is oh so powerful. The women encouraged Carol to continue leading them and singing together, thus the founding of the Denver Women's Chorus. As for my simultaneous involvement with Black and White Men Together and serving in several national leadership positions, I gave 100% for 3 terms as co-chair and then continued active involvement through 23 consecutive annual conventions. I'm still active today, but to a much lesser degree, but have now attended 32 of the 39 conventions. My Black co-chair in the mid-1980s was Dr. John Bush, the charismatic leader of the organization from the very beginning at the 1981 convention, and continuing every year through last year's gathering. John was a professor of sociology at UMass, and he used BWMT members as subjects for a research paper on interracial gay-male relationships. He is also a poet, creative writer, openly gay, published author, and a song leader. In 1983, he wrote what is referred to as the BWMT fight song, which is sung to the tune of Jesus Loves Me. John leads us in singing it every year at our closing banquet. Yes, even last summer at age 91. Talk about a vibrant senior citizen. He remains one of my dearest gay male friends. My biggest contributions to BWMT nationally were in two areas: board and organizational development and chapter development. In 1985-86, we created a national nonprofit board structure, getting our 501c3, which for our organization required balanced racial and regional representation. My dear San Francisco friend Stephen, who died last month from a brain tumor, was the attorney who wrote our national bylaws. And yours truly was the proofreader. I advocated and helped implement long-range strategic planning, which continues to this day. For example, when this year's convention was postponed because of COVID-19, the board and conference planners had to renegotiate multiple contracts for the next 3 years. Under John's and my leadership, this founding board also created a leadership development manual. We began using it at national conventions and regional conferences to train members around the country to have the confidence and skills to become effective leaders, both locally and for the future of the national organization. An important learning for me from this board: those who are financially able need to support the active participation of those who are not well off, so that no one is ever denied participation because of race or class or any other reason. This is still true today because we now have multiple scholarships available to support anyone who wants to attend a national BWMT convention. In my 3 years as co-chair, I traveled to 23 different cities doing chapter development work, providing trainings on fundraising and marketing, helping with long-range planning, brainstorming program ideas befitting the local community environment, facilitating conflict resolution, etc., and also helping to generate advance and post publicity for each local chapter while I was in town. A special note to Sage Singers. In 1985, a few BWMT members in our New York chapter were co-founders of Lavender Light, the Black and People of All Colors lesbian and gay gospel choir, which soon sang at our 1986 BWMT convention. Lavender Light does not attend every Gala Choruses festival, but when they do, their performances are always one of the highlights. In December of 1984, I moved with Chip to Los Angeles, but I was not happy in LA. So in January '86, I moved to Portland, Oregon, where my lesbian cousin Kate lives and where I eventually found work, at a bank, of course. My 40 additional hours a week as a volunteer activist continued through 1988, when I made the decision to move to San Francisco. Figuring if I couldn't find a job as an activist there, then I would really need to rethink my future. I wanted to work full-time as an activist to support both me and the causes about which I cared, without also having to work for a bank. I did not have a job when I left Portland, but I had one within 10 days of arriving in San Francisco, thanks to a PFLAG referral from Judith. Thank you, Judith, For the next 3 years, 3+ years really, I worked at AIDS Treatment News, about 60 hours a week instead of 80. But now it was 100% for the causes that I cared about. As the business office manager, I used my bank operations background to create new efficiencies that allowed us to begin offering full health insurance coverage for all 8 employees, which I considered a moral imperative as an HIV-focused organization. With newsletter media credentials, I got to attend the International AIDS Conferences in Montreal, 1989, and San Francisco, 1990. I was privileged to meet and work with Tony Kushner when Angels in America was in development at the Eureka Theater, because he had chosen Project Inform and AIDS Treatment News to be the beneficiaries of the first public performance of Part 1. Besides running the day-to-day operations and becoming the primary proofreader of the newsletter, my biggest contribution was organizing my gay Latino friends in San Francisco, who had immigrated from multiple Latin American countries, to create some of the first ever Spanish language resources on alternative HIV treatments. Prepared for and distributed at the International Lesbian and Gay Association, ILGA, World Conference in Acapulco, Mexico in 1991. Lastly, I was on the founding board of the Community Research Alliance, one of the country's first grassroots nonprofits established to conduct clinical trials on alternative HIV treatments with all the proper scientific protocols in place. Volunteering during my time in San Francisco included these 5 areas. 1, working on the advisory committee for Black and White Men Together's National Task Force on AIDS Prevention, the first openly gay organization to receive federal dollars from the Centers for Disease Control, a $1.25 million grant over 5 years. 2, helping Carol White recruit, and promote her 400 Voice Celebration 90 Festival course for Gay Games 3 in Vancouver, BC. Another top 5 life-changing experience for me. 3, being the San Francisco tour guide for Simon Nicoli, South Africa's leading Black gay activist, who is most responsible for LGBT protections being adopted by the African National Congress and then enshrined in the new South African Constitution, first in the world. Simon was on a BWMT-sponsored North America speaking tour to raise awareness of apartheid. 4, organizing and co-facilitating a day-long planning retreat for the 12 Bay Area PFLAG chapters, which resulted in board and newsletter resource conserving consolidation of 2 chapters in the East Bay and 2 on the peninsula, while maintaining all of their much needed support group dates and locations. But more importantly, helping them all learn to work and fundraise together so that San Francisco could host the National PFLAG Convention in 1994. And 5, chairing the program committee for the 1990 BWMT convention, which still to this day planned the organization's most racially and culturally and language, age, and gender diverse array of speakers and presenters for the multiple plenary sessions and 28 workshops. I returned to my beloved Denver on October 1st, 1991. And in early 1992, I was a founding member of Mayor Wellington Webb's inaugural Gay and Lesbian Advisory Committee, which subsequently became a full-fledged city commission. This was the time of anti-LGBT Amendment 2 and our community's campaign to defeat it. But for me, 1992 was the year that my brother Keen committed suicide on Tuesday, May 5th, the top life-changing event of my life. Janice, my most supportive cousin, came to work to give me this devastating news in person. And I knew of only one place to seek solace, Harmony, a Colorado chorale, which I knew rehearsed on Tuesday evenings. So that is where I went. To be surrounded by the healing sounds of choral music and an atmosphere of unconditional love and support. Mainstream suicide-specific support groups proved unhelpful to me, so I turned to my own LGBTQ community for what I needed in that regard. 2 months later, I attended Gala Chorus's Festival 4 here in Denver, where I cried almost nonstop, it seemed. But Gala Festival was such an important part of my grieving and healing process. Last month, on the 28th anniversary of my brother's death, May 5th also fell on a Tuesday. I'm always mindful of the day of the week, and I will never forget the importance of harmony in my life. I attended 3 additional Gala festivals, the next 3 consecutive ones, where I continued to find so much inspiration. 1996 in Tampa Bay, Florida, where my former partner Chocolate Chip was living at the time. 2000 in San Jose, California, where Nell Carter's performance was memorable. She was in the show Ain't Misbehavin'. And 2004 in Montreal, which I attended with my other longtime friend named Jan, the one who died this past April. Holly Near is a regular at Gala festivals too, and always so inspiring. In 2012, the festival returned to Denver, but I had to leave midway because my oldest brother Terry had almost died of septic shock, and I needed to travel to Maryland to be with my only surviving sibling. Thankfully, in 2016, I was able to participate fully in the most recent Gala Festival, also in Denver. Back to 1992 and Amendment 2. We had 3 brilliant attorneys on the Mayor's Advisory Committee. Mary Celeste, now a county judge, Jamie Henderson, a DGMC member whose mother I worked with in San Francisco when she was National PFLAG president, and Len Palma, a feisty and articulate Asian. And even though the polling numbers looked good for us in regard to Amendment 2, those 3 kept asking the most important question: what if? What if Amendment 2 passes? Well, as you know, it did pass. Another top 5 life-changing event, 2 in 1 year, both so negative and so painful. It was a lot to suffer through. But as a result of their work with other lawyers in the larger community, the Colorado Legal Initiatives Project was formed. A court injunction the day after our heartbreaking defeat kept it from ever becoming law. And in a precedent-setting case, it was eventually overturned by the US Supreme Court 6-3 on May 20th, 1996. Our Mayor's Advisory Committee took a major leadership role in the aftermath of that election. Because I was underemployed after my move back to Denver, I had the most time available, and thus became the primary organizer of the 8 working groups that met the week after the election at both MCC of the Rockies and Our Savior's Lutheran Church. This post-election organizing continued as a major involvement for me through 1993, when I needed to step down to focus on PFLAG work. I had rejoined the PFLAG Denver board in February 1992 and became co-chair. After Amendment 2 passed, however, PFLAG's helpline exploded. We were getting over 1,000 calls a month, many of them crisis calls. A decision was made in 1993 to create an administrative director staff position, for which I was hired, and I served in that capacity for 9 years. Within a few years of that fateful election, PFLAG had grown from 5 to 6 chapters in Colorado to 13 chapters. In addition to managing the huge growth and demands of the Denver chapter, as a volunteer, I helped with chapter development with all of the new chapters around the state. Visited most of them multiple times. I had a car back then. And I even facilitated the first organizing meeting of PFLAG Cheyenne, Wyoming, At a post-Amendment 2 meeting in Fort Collins, I was most inspired by the speaker Clarissa Pinkola Estes, author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Women Who Run with the Wolves. I arranged a lunch with her at her favorite restaurant in Southeast Denver, invited her to speak at a PFLAG monthly meeting. When Clarissa was scheduled, we had our largest chapter meeting ever with 300 plus in attendance, amazing turnout. And she loved PFLAG so much that she donated the royalties from her next book tour to our local chapter. In the era of Amendment 2, because of the rejection of a PFLAG workshop proposal for the Colorado PTA convention, our parents were furious and wanted to be able to speak more powerfully with a statewide voice. So I worked with them to create the Colorado chapter of PFLAG, the Colorado Coalition of PFLAG chapters. The next year, the state PTA accepted PFLAG's workshop proposal, a great example of focused, effective organizing, fueled by parental love of their children and anger at an unjust society. Over these years working for PFLAG, both on staff and as a volunteer, I facilitated several workshops at the national conventions on diversity and racial inclusion and on fundraising, sharing the Denver chapter's successful and varied funding strategies, a model that was not reliant on grants. After my training at a national convention, I also facilitated long-range strategic planning weekend retreats for boards and chapters in Wichita, Kansas, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Evergreen, Colorado. One proud occasion in the mid-1990s that was very meaningful to me was being presented with an honorary lifetime membership in the Gender Identity Center of Colorado, in recognition of my work to lift up trans voices and concerns, and to advocate for trans inclusion and equality within our own LGBT movement. Another proud involvement that I had was with the multiple award-winning 2009 documentary, Two Spirits. Just 2 weeks after the June 2001 murder of 16-year-old Navajo Fred Martinez Jr. in Cortez, Colorado, I was in San Francisco on vacation. Betsy Stevens, president of PFLAG's Four Corners, asked me to meet Fred's mother, Paula Mitchell, at the San Francisco airport, where she was being met by national staff from GLAAD. Paula was to speak at a candlelight vigil in Fred's memory to highlight the tragedy of this hate crime against one so young. And so it was that I spent 2 full days with Fred's mother at the most painful time of her life. Then in early 2006, Betsy recommended and introduced me to a husband-wife team that was making a documentary film called Two Spirits about Fred's life and death. So I requested a meeting with the Two Spirit Society of Colorado, where I met Travis Goldtooth, a Navajo Two Spirit who was a couple years older than Fred, but had attended the same high school with him. And soon, Travis and I became the outreach coordinators for the project. In addition to signing up nonprofits to be outreach partners to screen the film after it was completed, I was organizing educational workshops where I would show a 20 to 25-minute clip of film footage, followed by a panel discussion with members of the Two Spirit Society. The most remarkable of these presentations was at a Mountain West Regional PFLAG conference in Boulder in early 2009. To show how memorable and impactful these workshops were, especially this one in Boulder, here are 2 examples from my written report to the filmmakers. First, speaking to the panelists, but also about the film, a PFLAG mom said, quote, "I don't know if I can get this out." She was crying. "My gay son taught me that knowledge is power. What I have experienced this afternoon, what you have given me, is priceless," end quote. Second, afterwards, when asked about her impression of the workshop, Another woman said that she needed to get outside to clear her head because of the deep emotional experience. And that quote, "Every student in Colorado needs to see this film," end quote. Two Spirits had its world premiere at a sold-out screening at the Denver International Film Festival in November 2009. Fred's mother, Paula, who was most prominently featured in the documentary, got a long standing ovation after the screening. A few months later, I was told by my film festival liaison that other than the opening and closing events, Two Spirits was by far the most successful screening of the entire 2-week festival. Hard work rewarded, I think. In the years 2014 to 16, I was on a small planning team with guess who, Carol and Judith, Mary Dunn, and a couple others, to coordinate the educational and fundraising efforts of Sister Sheila Flynn during her visits to Denver each year. Sister Sheila founded a nonprofit called Kopanang, an empowerment program outside of Johannesburg, South Africa, for women and children infected and affected by HIV and AIDS. Some of you have seen, and may have even purchased, some of the beautiful embroidered handiwork of these women. I developed most of the marketing materials, including press releases and promotional flyers. In the third year being involved, I also helped with scheduling a week-long series of World AIDS Day events in Denver and Boulder, including a presentation to representatives of all the federal agencies in the metro area that deal with HIV. Sister Sheila and her dynamic traveling companion, Tozi Precious Makoba, one of the women from the project, were well received everywhere they spoke. In those 3 years, we helped raise $7,000 for this amazing, life-changing organization. Carol, Judith, and I have been profoundly impacted by these special friends and the work of this organization. We stay in touch with both Sister Sheila and Tozi. My experience with AIDS Treatment News's Spanish language resources at the ILGA World Conference in Acapulco sparked a huge interest in what was going on for our LGBTQ communities in other countries. So I scheduled to facilitate a PFLAG workshop at the ILGA World Conference in Rio de Janeiro in 1995. Definitely a top life-changing event. This time it was like a miniature United Nations for queer folks, with headsets for simultaneous interpretation in the conference's 3 official languages, Portuguese, Spanish, and English, plus one-on-one interpretation provided in French, Russian, and Asian languages. The concept of a non-governmental organization comprised of parents speaking out and publicly advocating on behalf of their LGBTQ children seemed almost incomprehensible to many in attendance. And it caught the attention of the media too. After the workshop, I was interviewed by the press, and the next day, as part of the conference coverage, PFLAG was on the front page of the country's largest circulation newspaper, Brazil's equivalent of the New York Times. It was at the Rio conference that I had the biggest aha moment of my entire activist life. Namely this: our global LGBTQ rainbow community is the missing piece of the puzzle for world peace. Because in spite of the potential barriers of national borders, different languages, races, and cultures, etc., we are the ones finding ways to love each other and to work together for change, to make the world a better place for all. This realization inspired my activism for the next 25 years. Starting in 1983, I began communicating with Luis Ma, one of Brazil's most visible gay activists, who had begun documenting the murder of trans women. In the early 1980s, Luis also founded a chapter of Black and White Men Together called Grupo Gay de Bahia, or GGB, in the city of Salvador, capital of the state of Bahia. The port of Salvador was the primary point of entry for Brazil's slave trade, and consequently, Bahia became the country's most African state. So a BWMT chapter there was a natural. By the time we finally met in person in Rio in 1995, Luis had already translated all of PFLAG's educational materials into Portuguese and had them printed for the conference and for my workshop. Afterwards, I made a side trip to Salvador to meet the other members of GGB. Luis had also arranged for what was my first ever TV interview as an activist to talk about PFLAG, and he was with me to interpret into Portuguese. The station's broadcast reach covered most of northern Brazil, including the Amazon basin. I returned to Denver, both exhausted and exhilarated. I attended 3 other ILGA World Conferences, New York in conjunction with Stonewall 25, where meeting the entire delegation from Japan was a highlight. Johannesburg, a truly pivotal LGBTQ event that impacted the entire African continent. And Oakland, California, where I witnessed firsthand the immigration of 2 friends whom I had met in Johannesburg previously, who had to say goodbye forever. After the conference, they literally had to disappear into the underground networks of 2 large American cities and not return home because it was truly a matter of life or death. A trans man from Zimbabwe who loved knowing about PFLAG and thought he might have a chance to survive in the United States. And a gay man and prominent activist from Uganda, whose apartment was raided and computer stolen, with names of many others whose lives were surely placed in danger just days before his departure to Oakland. These very personal international experiences over many years have made immigration equality my top charity. We need to find a way to return to a place of celebrating the many contributions of immigrants, including the untold number of immigrant slaves who were forced to come here in the building of this country. In the summer of 2018, just a few months after my retirement from Fairmount Cemetery, Judith asked me to meet for lunch with her and this young conductor guy named Kevin Crow to talk about her idea of a chorus for LGBTQ elders. What a concept, right? I'd received so much love, support, and inspiration from the LGBTQ choruses for over 35 years that I knew it was time for me to give back. And so began my journey with Sage Singers 2 years ago. For 40 years, I received my own ongoing training in fundraising, marketing, organizing, white privilege, anti-racism work, and more by attending 11 of the Creating Change conferences hosted by the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, well over a dozen national and regional PFLAG conferences, and of course, the 32 BWMT conventions. I try to always be in learning mode because no one has all the answers. We must learn to work together in order to achieve our so-called gay agenda. And yes, I do have one. And I'm sure by now that you have some sense of what it is. Equality and justice and freedom for every LGBTQ person of every race and color and background in every country of the world. Is that asking for too much? I think not, because we are the key to world peace. Thank you for your time and interest in my life. Love you all, Sage Singers. Thank you, Kim.
Wow.
I've been on an emotional roller coaster for 2 weeks or 3, getting preparing this and all the memories.
It was just beautiful.
It's just beautiful. This is Mo. Kevin, where are you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't want to say too much to let others speak as well. Thank you, Tim. It was, as I knew, just inspiring. And I know what we heard is maybe 1/10 of what you could have told us, or even less. So thank you so much. And we are so grateful that you're part of our community and part of Sage Singers. And it's people like you that kind of lift all of us up to do more. So I really appreciate you, and wonderful, wonderful history. Thank you. Kevin, can you help me check with people who want to ask some questions?
Sure. Kate has her hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, when is the memoir? This
Yeah.
record, an incredible record of a life that spanned so much, Tim. Are you planning on writing a memoir? That's my question.
Well, you know, I had a big 70th birthday party almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, in November of 2018, and I raised $11,500 net for 9 organizations. Sage Singers wasn't on my list yet, but Immigration Equality, and an organization that helps with anti-domestic violence and human trafficking in the Dominican Republic, Copenhagen, et cetera, et cetera. And for that, I wrote a 20-page life story, but some of the things here weren't included in that one. And at some point, I really do have to come back and combine all of it in a written thing. I am working with David Duffield, who's the Mr. History Colorado for our LGBT community. And he's the one doing oral interviews for the center's archive, which will be kept at the main library downtown. So, you know, he's getting all of my archival stuff, and he's interviewed me for about 12 hours on camera.
Wow, that's
you all lucked out. We had 4 3-hour sessions.
Thank you. If you have a question, will you use your participant hand there, or just wave? So looks like Janice Avery. No.
Carol White.
Yes, Tim, thank you for that. It was absolutely wonderful. I just wanted to also mention your work in Mariposa. Could you just tell us what Mariposa is and a little bit about that?
Mariposa, which is the Spanish word for butterfly, was the name that Althea Center's spiritual director, Dr. Jonathan Ellerby, came up with, because he knew I love butterflies. But the full name is Mariposa at the Althea Center, Embracing Wholeness, Transforming Lives in LGBTQ+ communities and beyond. We were getting into a rhythm before COVID hit, but you know, the basic thing we're doing is offering monthly programs of a great variety of documentary films, panels of various speakers. Some of you on this call have been participants, and then special, you know, larger scale special events for the larger community. And, you know, because of this program, Althea Center has marched in the last 2 Pride parades, and a lot of good things happening. It's definitely a very safe, supportive, celebratory environment in which to do my work.
Thank you.
All right, Scott West.
I really don't have a question, but I'd like to say thank you, Tim, for this. I usually don't get into presentations like this, but you had me gasping a little too. And And I'm certainly glad that you have been in the world.
Thank you.
And that's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you.
Judith? Thank you. 2 ounces. Judith, you have to unmute yourself.
Maybe we can
There you go.
unmute everybody.
Yeah. Tim, love you to pieces, like always. One of the things you did not mention was 2 or 3 awards that you've received, which, you know, of course you've received awards from BWMT and from PFLAG. I just wanted to mention those. And also, on a more personal level, my father was somebody who cried easily, and I've always loved it when men can cry easily, and that's something that you do, and I love you for it. Thank you for everything.
Jana had her hand up.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, a couple things. Tim, you didn't mention our trips to the t-shirt printer.
I didn't mention anything about Sage Singers, really.
Well, I just want to say for all the Sage Singers who maybe don't know Tim very well, when I came to Sage Singers just over a year ago, I didn't know Tim at all, and got on the board after a few months and met Tim. And Tim, you're just one of the best. You make me cry, and I don't cry. But just getting to know you through trips to Colorado Springs, mostly to pick up t-shirts, has been wonderful. And Sage Singers, we are so lucky to have had Tim on our board. He is leaving at the end of this fiscal year, which means 1 more month, and he will still be involved, I know.
Yeah.
But I just think you're a gem, and I really, really, really am happy to know you.
And Jana was surprised to learn that I knew a lot about her, because I was a chorus groupie for all the choruses in the state.
Yeah.
Including Rainbow.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you, Jana, for your feedback.
Mm-hmm. Bonnie.
Bonnie Barlow will have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I was just going to say it's great that you're mentioned in and are part of those other projects, Tim, but I really think a whole autobiography of Tim Wilson called The Accidental Activist is a necessary item that everyone needs to buy on Amazon. Okay?
Well, I am going to, I've got to do some more editing on my final version of the text, because my coach and mentor and director of tech rehearsal, Carol, had me put in prompts along the way. So I've got to take all the prompts out, and eventually Kate's going to do some editing, and we're going to post both the video and the text at some point, probably this coming week, depending on Kate's schedule.
I know an audiobook narrator who would be great for your audiobook version of An Accidental Activist.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Hey, Tim, do you want, speaking of your technical rehearsal, do you want to share what you had to do for your head?
Our friend Mo, who's our diva boss, loaned me at Carol's insistence some face powder to put on my shiny head and forehead.
You look perfect. You look beautiful.
You did.
Mm-hmm.
Who's next? I see. Is it Judith Witten?
Mm-hmm.
It's Marilyn.
Hi, Marilyn.
Hi, Marilyn.
Oh,
And Judith.
yes, but yes, I'm just kind of an adjunct Sage Singer person, but I've known Tim for quite a few years because he goes to the church I go to. We the church we go to, and I just love him to bits. He's just Your story today, Tim, was absolutely amazing.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Great to hear it all.
Amazing.
Really
I can't
cool.
believe all you've done.
Yeah.
But another thing that Tim does for our church is he organizes social outings.
Oh, yeah.
On top of everything else he does, he organizes social outings to gay and lesbian plays, and we all
Plays downtown.
Yeah, downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And
Too hot to handle.
it's mostly people from our church that go, but anyone's welcome. Anyway, Tim, thank you for that, and thank you for being in my life. You're just
fabulous,
an amazing person, and I love you to death.
Been wonderful meeting you both.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you.
You bet. Sorry, honey.
I can't see everybody's hand. Anybody else have a comment?
Carol White again?
Yes, I wanted to just hold this up. Wait, let me take this back. This background that I have here is Sage Singer's concert, but I want to take that off. Does it?
It doesn't do it.
I don't know how to get it off. Well, anyway.
Doesn't work.
Here is the picture that Judith was showing earlier of Tim with Judith and me in our backyard on our deck. This was taken, I think, in 1992 when Tim had hair and a mustache.
It's hard to see. You can't really see it, Carol.
I wonder, Carol, would you be willing to?
There it
he's
is.
floating over the concert.
Here's Tim.
That. Wow.
Tim, what happened to the mustache? I'm not even going to ask about the top head.
Well, I even had a beard. You know, in the 80s, I had a beard. That's one reason Chip was so interested in me. Being very blunt.
Let's see. Christine has her hand up.
Tim, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story. I am so impressed with you. I've been impressed with you since I met you, but knowing more about all the things you've done is just really touching. And I was crying a couple of times during your talk. So anyway, thank you for being in this world and making a difference.
Thank you.
Christine, you're right. You hear that, you know, throughout our lives, whatever topic, subject it is out in the world, you hear that one person can make a difference, make such a difference. And
to do what you love.
And yes, and to do what you love. And Tim is one of these people. And like we said, we can't be more grateful for him to be involved with us and involved in our community. You've made a difference, Tim, and you should be proud, and your parents and your brother would be proud.
Now, my oldest brother is the only one left in our immediate family, but I have a niece and two wonderful grandnephews that I love and get to spend time with back in Maryland. So.
Tim, I think what blew me away about your story is I think we've known, or I've known, that you have a huge heart. I had no idea how many facets of the LGBT community that you have done so much good for, with African Americans and trans individuals and Two-Spirit and immigrants and just so many people. It blows my mind. It's really, really amazing. Absolutely. This is going to become my video to show people when they think they can't make a difference in the world. I'm going to be like, well, I have a talk for you to watch, and
right.
You'll see.
That's true. And like we said, we only heard part of it, part of his history. He worked so hard to cut it down into a reasonable time frame. So
Mo gave me permission for 45 minutes.
he's gonna buy me lunch this week. Oh, I didn't tell you that, Tim. Sorry. Anybody else? You have a few more minutes. If you have something you want to say to him privately, you can always email Tim, but
yeah, I want to just
Betsy,
add my thanks for all of that, Tim. And I think that I first met you when I joined the PFLAG board. And that was probably around 2000. And then I was active with PFLAG for quite a while. But I could see that that was only one of the many, many, many things that you were doing. And I was very impressed right from the beginning. So thank you for that wonderful story. And keep going.
Yeah,
you're gonna have a lot. You're gonna have a lot to add to it. I know.
Yeah, I have things going on. Stay tuned.
yeah.
Judith insists that we continue to be active, vibrant, contributing elders, and I intend to do that.
Right. Yes. Yes. I think Sarah Winter is the person who introduced me to you.
Yeah.
And PFLAG.
Mm-hmm. To be continued is your sequel.
Right.
Anybody else? I think we'll, well, Tim, if you don't know this yourself, I know every one of us here has times with our own self-esteem or mental health issues, or, you know, we're human, and we overthink things sometimes and maybe not feel like we're what we contribute, or are we worth it? What are we doing in life? And I just want to say that you are a very special human being, and you have impacted this world immensely, and you should feel very proud of yourself. So thank you.